Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is June Ariano-Jakes, and I want to share some stories with you on addiction, on homelessness, a little bit on gang violence, but because primarily the people here today are first responders, are nurses in the ER and on the wards, and mothers, I'm going to try and integrate our conversation specifically to what you do, just so that you get an idea of the people behind the patient. We all know the statistics. 81% of all overdose deaths are males. 3 out of 4 suicides are men. All young men to middle-aged men. We have a huge problem with that demographics. And we can say it's because men are the risk takers, but we have to get to a point of really focusing in on the fact that men are suffering, and they make up a huge disproportionate number of in that demographics. I have 5 adult children, 3 daughters, 2 sons. For 23 years, my son Nathan struggled with heroin, crack, and meth addiction. And during that time, his addiction took him to some very, very horrific places, some very dangerous places, some devastating places for him and for our family. As well as my son struggling for the 23 years that he struggled, I've also worked in the field of addiction as an outreach worker on the street, as well as in a mission and in a shelter. I have volunteered over 13,000 volunteer hours, as well as I've been a paid employee to shelters and missions. And I have found, from my experience both with my son and the experience of people that I have come to know and care deeply about, that there's only 2 reasons why people try drugs. The first is curiosity. People are curious. We're curious people. What is this all about? What's the big deal? Why do people do it? And the second is pain. We recognize physical pain. That's obvious. You know, someone is prescribed an opioid because of a car accident, a slip and fall, a sports injury, a skiing accident. We recognize that. We see it. It's not complicated. But the bigger issue is emotional pain. And that's really complex because there's many, many reasons why people have emotional pain. Maybe they're living in a home with domestic violence. There might be sexual abuse as a child or sexual assaults. People may be part of the LGBTQ community, and they may not be getting the acceptance and support from their families. Bullying, feelings of abandonment or neglect, or not feeling like you're good enough. There are many, many reasons why people are suffering with emotional pain, and we have to recognize it because it manifests itself in forms of depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and it's a real issue. We're not going to talk statistics as far as numbers go, but what I will say is that in this room today, several of you probably are struggling with drug or alcohol misuse. And if it isn't you, it's your brother or your sister, your mother or your father, your son or your daughter. We all know someone who is struggling, even if you aren't really aware of it, because it is that prevalent. There's no shame in having the disease of addiction, but there is help available. And what's most important is being able to access that help without that feeling of shame or stigma that we often have around addiction and people that are suffering from addictions and mental illness, and very often they do go hand in hand. You may wonder where I'm coming or going with this as I'm sharing these different stories, but I think you'll sort of see how they do tie in. Over the years of my son's 23-year struggle with addiction, he has gone through horrific abuses. He has been beaten with baseball bats and with metal pipes. He has been kicked and stomped. He has been stabbed numerous times. He has been shot at. He has been burned. He's been held against his will. There is absolutely no way that my son could have lived through these horrific abuses and not be suffering from PTSD. They are profound incidences in his life, and many people who are struggling with addiction also go through profound, life-altering situations because of their abuse. Now, when my son, it was a month before his 14th birthday, he was hit by a truck getting off a bus. He sustained massive injuries. He broke his leg, his kneecap, his ankles. He cracked and broke all of his rib cage. He ruptured his spleen. He damaged his left lung, his left kidney. He went into congestive heart failure, developed a sepsis after 7 hours of surgery. And during that time of his recuperation, he was given morphine, then Demerol, and then T3s for pain. They were necessary. He needed them. The pain was excruciating. There's no question. He needed those opioids during that time in hospital. What I didn't know, and that he shared with me years later, was that he loved the feeling he got from the opioids. Now, I've had kidney stones, I've had surgery, and I've been given morphine. I needed it at that time, but I hated the feeling I got. My son, on the other hand, loved the feeling. So, whereby I'm not prone to being addicted to opioids. He clearly was. And it was like a seed awakening, in a sense. At one time, my son was held against his will for 35 days and tortured. You cannot go through these kind of abuses and not be permanently scarred, not be permanently troubled with anxiety and depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. And how could that not be his bottom? You know, we hear people say someone has to reach their bottom. Well, what is a bottom? I'm not so sure that everyone has a bottom, because for far too many people, bottom is death. And we have to do everything we can to prevent that from happening. I'm going to share a couple of stories with you. One man that frequented our shelter years ago, he was really a lovely man. He was quiet-spoken, he was very polite, he was a gentleman, and he had a hard time sleeping. And so often at night I would sit up with him and we would just yik-yak. And I asked him one night, I said, "Gerard, what happened? What broke?" Because let's face it, you don't start at a shelter. You end up at a shelter when you have used every other possible resource, where perhaps you've lost your home, or family no longer allows you to stay, or you have no friends where you can couch surf. By the time you're using shelters at night, that's the end of the road. And I asked him, I said, "So what happened, Gerard? What broke?" And he said to me, "June, I wasn't always like this. I was married to the love of my life. I had a son, a daughter, we owned a home, we had 2 vehicles, we even had a snowmobile. Life was really good and we were really happy. And one Christmas, We were going to go and spend it with my wife's family. They lived 3 hours away, a 3-hour drive away. There was supposed to be a little bit of snow, but nothing in the forecast gave me the information of what was to come. So we started driving, but before long, we started getting freezing rain, and then the temperature dropped, and the roads became treacherous, and whiteout conditions came in. I lost control of the car. It spun out of control. It went down an embankment. The whole side of the car was smashed in. There was no sound coming from my wife. There was no sound coming from my daughter in the seat behind my wife. I knew they had been killed instantly. My little boy was in the car seat right behind me, and he was saying, "Daddy, help me." But there was nothing I could do. The steering column had collapsed on me. I was trapped in my car. It was smashed in. I couldn't move, even to sort of go back to try and, comfort my son or put my arm back. I was completely immobilized. It was 26 hours before the first responders showed up. For 26 hours, Gerard was trapped in the car with his wife and his daughter dead and his son dying, and he was completely helpless to do anything. Besides that, he also had physical injuries. How could he not be broken? Of course he's broken. His life spiraled out of control, and he became heavily addicted, and it was the only thing for him that quieted the pain. I have another friend, Warren, and Warren's a bit of a mess. But why? There's always a reason. Warren grew up in Nova Scotia. His father was a really harsh man. He often beat Warren and his brothers. He beat his wife. He was a really hard man, a really tough man. He beat the boys if they didn't chop enough firewood, or his wife if supper wasn't perfect. And one day when Warren was 14 years old, he came in the house and his father was punching his mother. He picked up his father's shotgun and he shot his father. He is now mid-50s. Back then, we didn't have youth courts. We didn't have youth detention centers. We didn't think in terms of mitigating factors. What caused this? Clearly, this child has been traumatized for years. He was protecting his mother. There's many reasons, but back then, those weren't considerations. And what happened to Warren was that he was sentenced and sent to a men's federal penitentiary. And what do you think happened to my friend Warren over and over and over again over the years of his incarceration as a child and as a young man? He was raped repeatedly. And when he was finally released from prison, it was with the condition that he not return to Nova Scotia. Now today, we know the most important part of rehabilitation, of acclimatizing back into society, is having that support system around us, having family, having friends, having a support network. But back then, that wasn't a consideration. And so what did Warren do? He started hitchhiking west. And to quiet his pain, he started using drugs. And he's been homeless and on the street ever since. But I'm going to share a story with you. You see, he loves me. Just putting it out there, guys. On the street, some people might consider me a hottie. I might be a grandmother, I get that. I might be a senior citizen. But it's all perspective. Just putting it out there. Now, every time I see Warren, he says to me, June, will you marry me? And I say to him, Warren, thank you so much for the compliment, but I can't marry you. I would make a terrible wife. I work all the time. And he would go, okay. And the next time I see him, he would ask me again, June, will you marry me? And again, I would say to him, Warren, thank you for the huge compliment, but I can't marry you. I would make a terrible wife. I work too much. Well, one day he came up to me and he had the biggest smile on his face, and he was kind of rushing when he saw me, and he said, I've got it. I've got an idea. I don't know why I didn't think of this before. He said, June, if you marry me, I am going to take everything out of the top of my cart. Now, keep in mind, Warren, everything he owns, everything in his world is in his shopping cart. And he said he was going to take everything out of the top of the shopping cart that belonged to him. He was going to remove it and stick it underneath on that shelf of the shopping cart so that I could put my stuff in the top of the shopping cart. That's love. I was getting the penthouse suite. Those are the people who I am privileged to know. Those are people that I have been privileged to be able to share in their lives. One day I heard that this girl had recently been released from the women's penitentiary, and she was living on the street. I didn't know her from years before when she was there. Some people did, and they mentioned that she was mean, she was aggressive, she was a bully, she would fight, people didn't like her. She was just nasty. But one day I saw her sitting on the corner of 108 and King George Highway, and she had her back up against the wall and her feet out, and she had her stuff around her on the sidewalk. So I thought, well, I'll grab a bag of stuff. She may need some things. I put in some women's hygiene products, toothpaste, toothbrush, comb, some socks, and I went across the street. And I said, now, before I get started on any farther, I'm going to warn you. The language in this next story is offensive. I'm sorry if it offends you, but if I change the language, you're going to miss the story. And when I share a story, I have to tell you as it unfolded. It's raw and it's graphic. So I walked across the street and I said, hey, how you doing? And she said, fuck off. And I said, that good a day? And she said, I hate you fucking church ladies. You all want to save the junkies. And I said, well, I'm not here on behalf of any church. And I'm not here to save anybody. I just wondered if you could use a few products. And she said, yeah, well, you can fuck off. And I said, okay, well, you take care. And I left. The next day, I looked out of our building and I saw that she was sitting there on the sidewalk again, in the same area. And I thought, you know what? I'll go down and just see how she's doing today. And I went down. I crossed the street. And again I said, hi, how you doing today? And she said, I told you, leave me the fuck alone. I don't want to see you. I don't want to talk to you. And I said, well, you're a phony. And she stood up and she said, what did you call me? I said you were a phony. And she said, you don't know nothing about me. You don't know me. You don't know my life. You don't know where I've been. You don't know nothing. And I said, you are right. I don't. But what I do know is that you're a phony. And she said, yeah, well, fuck you. So I left. Now the next day, I saw that she was sitting in that same spot. I knew now that she was waiting for me. Because if she didn't want to see me again, she would have moved around the corner, or she would have moved down the sidewalk, but she wouldn't be in the same spot where she and I had interacted the 2 previous days. I knew she was waiting for me. She had a question to ask. So I crossed the street and I said, "How's your day going?" And she said, "Yesterday you called me a phony. Why would you do that when you know nothing about me?" And I said, "I called you a phony for a reason. The other day, I saw a mom and a little boy walking by you. The little guy tripped and fell and he was crying. You reached into your backpack and you pulled out this little stuffy. I know that everything that you have in your world right now is in your backpack. So that stuffy was important to you, but you took it out and you gave it to him. And you made him smile and he stopped crying. You act very tough and you act very mean. But I believe that you have such a kind and generous heart, and I think deep down you are just a really nice person." And she said, "Yeah? Well, don't tell anybody, okay? Because if you do, I will come back and fucking kick your ass." And I said, "Lips are sealed." And we became good friends. You see, what happened to Tia was her mom and dad were both heavy drug users. And when she was a little girl, her mom overdosed and died. Her father died of an apparent overdose, but was it an overdose or had there been some criminal factor involved? They were never really sure. But she got sent to live with her grandmother. Her grandmother ended up ill and was put into a nursing home. So Tia got put into the foster care system. And she was moved from place to place. Some homes were fine, but a couple weren't. And she was physically and sexually assaulted in 2 of the houses. Eventually she got put into group homes. She would run away, they'd bring her back. She'd run away again, and she got put back. And then she started getting into serious trouble, and she ended up in the criminal justice system. Everyone who should have protected her let her down. They abandoned her, they neglected her, they failed to protect her. So she had to build this armor around her and not let anyone in, because if you got in, you could hurt her. But if she could keep her armor up, you couldn't get in, you couldn't hurt her. And that's understandable. That is completely understandable. She's been hurt enough. So she was tough, she was hard, and she kept people away, and it was successful because people didn't want to be around her. You know, oftentimes you'll see people that are homeless and on the street and they'll ask for money. If you don't want to give someone money, you don't have to. You don't have to even feel guilty about it. But what I would really, really ask you to do is to look at that person. Look them in the eye and say, "I'm really sorry. I can't help you with that today, but I really hope your day gets better." It takes seconds to make a difference, but too many people walk by as if they did not hear that that person is invisible, that they do not matter. Or you have mean people that will hurl things like, "Well, get a job." Well, that's just stupid. Making a comment to someone, "Just get a job," is wrong on every level. Who is going to employ this person? They are struggling so deeply with their addiction. They may be battling mental illness. They have no home to live in. How can they get a rest to go to work or wash and clean up? So it's cruel. But by just stopping and saying, "I see you. I hear that, you're hurting, and I'm wishing you a better day," that can make all the difference. Remember, People that are addicted are not bad people. They may do bad things, but they are sick people, and we have to remember that. My son was two very different people. There was my son, and there was my son on drugs. My son was loving, caring, compassionate. My son on drugs could be ruthless, mean, a thief. But I never confused the two. I always was very mindful that this is my son. This is my son on drugs when his brain is altered, but that is not my son. I never ever questioned my son's love for me. Remember, your loved one's addiction is not about you. It's not about me. Their addiction is about their pain and suffering. They're being held hostage to their addiction, and we are held hostage to their behaviors. The love I had for my son when he was deep in his addiction, or during brief periods when he was healthy, was exactly the same. It was unconditional. I liked him better when he was straight, but my love for him was exactly the same. One man that I knew well, his name was Norman, and he was schizophrenic. And he would kind of wander along, and he'd kind of talk to himself and mumble a bit. And one night rather, it was early November, and it was one of those snowy, rainy, sleety kind of nights where it didn't know if it wanted to rain or snow. It was miserable. And he came into the shelter, and I said to him, "Hey, Norman, are you going to stay with us tonight?" And he went, no, I'm not going to stay with you, no. And he was just kind of wandering back and forth and saying no. And I said, "Oh, okay, well, can I get you something to eat?" No, don't want anything to eat, no, don't want anything to eat. So I said to him, "Norman, you came in here tonight, so I'm thinking there must be something that I can do for you. Why don't you tell me what I can do for you tonight?" And he came up and he kind of had his head down and he said, "Hug me." And I said, "Well, that I can do with pleasure. It's nothing like a hug from a friend." So I put my arms around Norman, and he literally sunk into the hug, and he just kind of stayed there. And then he straightened up. And he turned to go, and he goes, "Love you," as he's shuffling off. And I said, "Oh, I love you more, Norman." And he goes, "I know." Norman overdosed and died that night. And all I could think of when I heard that the next morning was that I hoped that he had overdosed and died very soon after he had left our building. That the last contact he had was being told he was loved. That the last contact he had with another human being was a hug that said, "I care about you." And that he wasn't abused or treated meanly or anything to that effect before he died. I can only hope. On February 17th, 2014, after struggling for 23 years with the most devastating and hardcore addiction to heroin, cocaine, crack cocaine, meth, my son did what no one had been able to do for him. He found himself in a shelter in a neighboring community. He was dope sick. He had pneumonia. He was just weak, fragile, and he was down to about 110 pounds. My son is 5'11". He's a big guy, and he would be a husky man when he's healthy. And he realized he was at a crossroads. And he said, "Today, I have to make a decision. I'm either going to fight like heck to live, or I'm going to die because I've got nothing left. And he made a decision that he was going to live. And on his own, he went out and he found a place, and he made that decision after 23 years that he was never going to be homeless again. I could not be more in awe of the courage and the strength and the survival tactics that he used to get through those 23 years. 5.5 months later, I was driving down King George Highway going to Wally, and I saw my son walking down the sidewalk. And I thought, oh, he must have maybe an appointment with a probation officer. So I honked the horn, and as soon as I did, he pulled his hoodie up his face, and I thought, well, what the heck? So I hit the horn again, and he started to run. I looked in the mirror, and he's running, and I'm thinking, oh no, we're not going down this road again. No, you have worked way too hard, Nathan. You have worked way too hard. This is not happening. So I turned the car around in the middle of the highway, and I started after him as he is running. He ran into Bear Creek Park, crossed the parking lot, jumped over the little post fence that they have there, you know, the logs, and he jumped over it, and he started heading down a path. Put my car in park, ran, jumped over the log, started down the path after my son. And he's running, and I'm running after him. Now, I'm a senior, plus I don't run. But I'm running as fast as I can, and it's killing me. And I was so out of breath, I just yelled, just stop. And he stopped, and he bent over, and he started throwing up. And I said, Nathan, what happened? And he looked up and he said, who did you call me? It wasn't my son. And it's like, okay. I said, I am so sorry, sweetheart. I thought you were my son. And he goes, oh, he's fucked up too, is he? And I said, well, he used to be. But he's been clean for 5.5 months, and you look exactly like him. And when I hit the horn and you start to run, I thought he started using again. And so I chased you. And he goes, okay. And I said, okay, well, hey, I know why I was running. Why were you running? And he said, well, there's a warrant out for my arrest. When you hit the horn, and then when you turned around, I thought, ooh, unmarked police car. They're coming after me. There's a warrant out for me. So I ran. So I gave him a hug and I said, you know, I'm really sorry about this. That's okay. You kind of know he's kind of going, that's okay, crazy lady. He said, man, for an old lady, you sure can run fast though. When people are brought into your ER by ambulance, you will find that oftentimes they may be the same person coming in time after time. I'm housed, you're housed. Maybe in a 10-year period, we may access an ER maybe one time, maybe. But for people who are heavily addicted and homeless, their safety and well-being is so compromised that they tend to have to access emergency facilities much more frequently than we do. So someone where, like myself, might be one time in 10 years, for someone who's struggling on the street with their addiction, they may be brought into an ER maybe 10 times in a year. Overdoses, violence, some sort of traumatic event, they are brought in more frequently. And oftentimes, they are treated with complete disrespect. My friend Kim was brought in. He was curb stomped. He had his ankle broken. He had teeth knocked out. His face was very swollen, black and blue. and he was brought into the ER. The doctor came in, I guess with his pad or equipment, didn't look at him, just kind of went, okay, yeah, okay, well, I see you've been here 3 times in the last 8 weeks. What a waste of our services. We got a lot of sick people around here. Look, we're going to get an x-ray taken. I'll come back and let you know what it says. He never looked at Kim. He didn't value him. He treated him as an inconvenience. When the x-rays came back, he came in and again, didn't really look at him. He tossed him an air cast and said, here, you're going to need to put this on. And gave him 1 crutch and told him he would sign his release papers. You know, he could go when he got his stuff together. Kim asked if he could have some painkillers, and the doctor snickered and said, no. Now, that was a real missed opportunity. That was a real missed opportunity. Number one, he is being discharged to the street. He is now more vulnerable than he was a couple hours earlier. Now, not only could he face danger out there, he's got about 12 blocks to walk to get back to his area. He's in pain, and he hasn't even been given painkillers. Because what, he may abuse them? Excuse me. He is in pain. People who are addicted, they suffer pain just like you do, just like I do. They cry like us, they bleed like us, and they have pain like us, but they're not always treated like us. I would ask you to do this the next time someone is brought in to your emergency department. They are sitting here. I want you to pull up a chair, unless you don't feel safe. But pull up a chair and look them in the eye. Don't look at their history. Look at this man. Look at this woman who has been brought in and call them by name. This is a person suffering. Build a relationship. They don't want to be here for starters. They are scared that they're going to get dope sick before they are seen. They feel judged. They feel stigmatized. The last place they want to be is in this ER. But they've been brought in because of an overdose or a beating or some situation. Sit down for a second and call them by name and say, I know you want to get out of here as quickly as possible. You're probably worried about getting sick. I'm going to talk to the doctor and see if we can fast track you a little bit, right? This is what I want you to be saying. I want to see if the doctor will fast track you a little bit so we can see if there's anything we need to help you with, or if you're able to go. I'm going to get you a glass of juice. You just sit here for a few minutes. I'm going to try and see if we can do this as quickly as possible. That person now feels validated. They feel seen. They know that I recognize that they're in pain, that they don't want to be here, that they're scared, that if they have to sit in the ER for 5 hours, they're going to leave because they're going to be so dope sick they can't stay there and they won't be seen. And what happens when you do that is you build a relationship. This person is going to be back in your ER. It's just a matter of time. And because you have treated them with kindness and respect and consideration, you treated them the way any one of us would expect to be treated, the next time they're brought in, they're going to be looking for you. Because they knew you cared. I know that when people come in, they can be rude, they can be demanding, they can be obnoxious. But that's why I was telling you the stories. Look past that tough exterior. Oftentimes the people that come across as being most unlovable are the people that need love the most. Also remember that people that heavily use drugs, oftentimes, not always, but very, very frequently, their emotional and social maturity kind of stifles at that time. So whereby you may be dealing with someone in their 30s, but they may present more as a teen. Because that's kind of where they stifled at. I don't know that there's actually any medical proof of that, any scientific proof, but it's a fairly common, I think, understanding. So their reaction to something you say or something you do may be more typical of a teen. There's many, many barriers to patients following up on treatment. And I think just being aware of those barriers may help alleviate some of your frustration as caregivers. They may not physically be able to get to an appointment. They may not have the means. They may forget. They may be high or on the nod, and days and times just are not there. A lot of people have a tremendous amount of shame, and so they avoid as much as they can. And also they fear being judged. So a lot of people won't follow up on care. Now, when that doctor looked at my friend Kim and let him know that he was taking up valuable time from sick patients, to him I have to say, Kim may very well have been the sickest person that he will have seen all day. Many people who are struggling with hardcore drug use, who are homeless, have many, many medical issues. First off, many have Hep C, many have HIV, many people have lung conditions from breathing, living in buildings where there was black mold, or they may have crack lung from smoking crack and meth. There are many, many reasons why this person in front of you is very ill. They don't have healthy eating habits. They don't have proper rest. On top of that, their disease of addiction could mean that at any time they may overdose and die. This person that you're sort of dismissing as wasting time may in fact be one of the sickest people you'll see on your whole shift. There is a very, very small window of opportunity when somebody is ready to get help. And we have so many gaps in our system that is unfortunate, because if somebody finally gets to a point of wanting to get help, they have a 3-week wait just to get into detox. And then after that, when they are at their most vulnerable, there may be a 3-week wait again to get into treatment. And that just exasperates the revolving door. We have to have a system whereby when somebody asks for help, we take them right now, at this moment, because the next day for too many is one day too late. We have to change our system so that where people that need help get it, because they are suffering with a life-threatening illness. And there is a huge difference in recovery houses as well. There are the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you want to make sure that when you send someone to a recovery house, or you have a loved one that goes to a recovery house, that it is a good one, because nothing is worse than somebody finally agreeing to get some help only to be treated in a substandard, sub-care manner. There is no one-size-fits-all with addiction. 12-step programs work for some people, millions worldwide, but they don't work for everyone. Abstinence programs work for many people. They don't work for others. Many people have been more successful with an abstinent base along with medically assisted treatment. It's scientifically based. It is medically sound. Suboxone, methadose, or methadone. It saves lives. It prevents overdose. It keeps people functioning. It greatly reduces relapse. One concern that I often have is when people go to a place of help, if they have a relapse, they're often kicked out. And I kind of think, seriously? If I was a diabetic and I decided I'm going to eat 6 butter tarts, my glucose levels are off the chart, what happens to me? Do I get kicked out of the doctor's office? Does the doctor say, hey, you don't follow my advice, I'm not gonna keep you as a patient anymore? No, what they would do is adjust my meds. What they would do is send me to a dietitian to try and figure out, what are my triggers? Well, why are we not doing that with people that have a relapse? A relapse means they need more help, not to be kicked off the plan. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. And the most important aspect of recovery is having someone who believes in you. Even if it is just one person, everyone needs somebody who believes in them. We should never treat relapse as a failure. And we have to get to a point where we end the stigma, the shame, the blame, this is a weakness, you have no willpower. That has to end. We have to start treating diseases and illnesses that affect the brain, like addictions, like mental illnesses, like depression, like anxiety, in the same way with the compassionate care that we treat physical illnesses. We've got to remove the stigmas, and we've got to give people access to the help that they need and the access they deserve. 90% of the people that are in our prison system are in because in some way there is a drug or an alcohol component in there. It might not be addiction per se. It might not be drug possession. It might be shoplifting, break and enters. It might be car accidents. It may be vehicular homicide. Something that alcohol or drugs impacted. 90% of all people incarcerated are in because of drug or alcohol related crimes. And 70% of those people, 70% of them, are struggling with hardcore addiction. We will never, ever incarcerate our way out of a health problem. People don't need to be punished for being sick. They need to be treated for their disease, not punished. And lastly, be kind. Show compassion. You have no idea what pain or trauma another person may be carrying. Like some of the stories I shared, we don't know what anyone else's journey has been. We do not walk in their shoes. We do not know their story. Be kind to each other and be kind to yourselves. And thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Take care. Bye-bye.